Welcome everyone, Costin here with my campaign overview guide for Nakai, the Wanderer of the Lizardmen race in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Now generally speaking, with these kind of videos, I would spend the early part of the video, or a good portion of the video, talking about the race in question, and I get to the Legendary Lord. Here I'm going to have to cut it short when it comes to the race, because Nakai plays very differently than any other Legendary Lord of the Lizardmen. I mean, Axolotl is fairly unique, but Axolotl is still at least occupies settlements, whereas Nakai is a horde army. And that comes with a bunch of pros and a bunch of cons. And Nakai's campaign is probably going to be one that's going to take a while to ramp up. He does have strength, but he's also fairly vulnerable. You need to be careful in your campaign, and it's going to take a while for you to become an unstoppable force of nature, though you absolutely can become a really powerful faction if you are playing as Nakai. Just to talk about the Lizardmen army roster as well as their hero selection, typically speaking, with Lizardmen, the one thing you want to focus on early in the campaign is to focus on Saurus. So you want to get Saurus with spears, regular Saurus, then Saurus with shields, Saurus warriors with shields, or Saurus spears with shields, eventually into Temple Guards. That will also unlock or increase your hero capacity for Saurus Scar veterans. Later on, as you get more money, you can focus on Bastillodons, Stegodons, and eventually things like Carnosaurs, Dreadsaurians, if you so desire. Though the Dreadsaurians, the Troglodyons, the Carnosaurs, they're really a very expensive late game choice. More often than not, you're going to focus on Bastillodons. That's the generic choice you should make, but certain Legendary Lords do get benefits or restrictions when it comes to Saurus. So for instance, Cult of Sotek does have a major issue with recruiting Saurus at the start of the campaign, though you do resolve that relatively early in your campaign. So they might be using a lot of skinks early on in the campaign. That's the whole point of that. Axolotl would be using skinks. So it depends on the effects of a Legendary Lord, but the generic choice when it comes to Lizardmen, get Saurus early on in the campaign, switch to dinosaurs. The Lizardmen strengths come from their infantry line, and then from their monstrous units. They do have ranged options, flying options, but the range options, unless you're talking about Axolotl, the range options are not really worth investing too much in. I mean, Chameleon Skinks are good, but it's really Axolotl that elevates these units to be exceptional and being able to win battles that they rightly should lose, because he vastly increases the power of Chameleon Skinks and Chameleon Stalkers when you are playing as him. So generally speaking, go with Saurus, then dinosaurs. For Nakai, you might want to go into Crocscars, but that's a discussion for later in this video. So that's the Lizardmen situation when it comes to the army roster. What about hero and lord choices, just to cover that very quickly? Well, lord choices, you do have Crocscar Agents, Red-Crested Skinks, and Saurus Old Blood. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to get the Saurus army, Saurus Old Blood is probably your best choice. Crocscars for Crocscars, and Red-Crested Skinks for Skink armies. You do have a fourth lore choice, though it is going to be a limited one. It is for a rite that happens every turns, where you can awaken a Slan Mage Priest to become a lord choice. It unlocks after 20 turns, and every 10 turns after that you can use it to get a new lord for your armies. Hero choices, you do have Saurus Scar Veterans, Skink Chiefs, Skink Oracles, and Skink Priests. When it comes to these hero choices, one of the ones I would actually focus on getting quite early on in the campaign for any Lizardmen Legendary Lord would actually be the Skink Chiefs. The reason is these guys do provide casualty replenishment. It may not be the best casualty replenishment, but at least it is casualty replenishment. As for Skink Oracles and Skink Priests, they're magic users. They're not really the best magic, but they are a way of getting magic in an army when you don't have a Slan Mage Priest to lead an army. And when it comes to Saurus Old Scars, yeah, they're just a good good melee choice, though they can be a bit difficult to unlock early on in the campaign, seeing as you require a tier 4 settlement to be able to increase their capacity. Though there are events to be able to do that. But that's what you need to know about the rosters and the lords. Now let's talk about Nakai and his situation. Nakai is a horde faction. He doesn't take territory. When he takes a settlement, you get a post-battle option to either raise it to the ground for a bit of money, or you can dedicate it to a particular. You can dedicate the temple settlement to a particular temple. There are 3 temples in total: Quaxel, Itzel, Shalanka, and these will give you various benefits. One of the problems that comes in here for Nakai is that the money he's going to get from post-battle is not going to be that great, because he can't sack settlements, he can only raise them. So he's going to have limited money throughout the course of his campaign. On top of that, he is a horde faction, but he's a horde faction that has a regular upkeep. He's not like the Beastmen. So you are heavily dependent on your vassal tribute. Your main horde building will generate a bit of income, but it's not going to be sufficient. Instead, what you want to do as Nakai is take a significant amount of territory and get that vassal tribute. Every settlement will be 750, 780 income, and a portion of that will obviously be transferred to you because they are your vassals. So in this case, the defenders of the Great Plan only have 1 settlement. The first battle you fight is actually for this tower. You can auto-resolve this even on the highest difficulty, though you will take some substantial losses. Though you won't lose any unit. But every settlement will be by default 750 income. You'll get 150 for every settlement. That means you need a substantial empire to really make this work. There is research to improve on that, so tribute from vassals, or through the temples of the old ones, you can get certain effects to improve that. So you can get celestial beneficence to increase tribute from vassals by 50% to really improve your vassal income. There used to be a vassal income cap. They have removed that or significantly increased that. I don't remember which one it is, so it's less of a problem. Now, another thing to talk about Nakai is the way he handles recruitment. Nakai's horde unlocks units with other hordes using global recruitment to get access to them. What this means in practice is that the only way to recruit units, if you're playing as Nakai, is through Nakai's own horde. Every other lord they recruit will have a horde, but their horde will be limited, will not be able to recruit units. They can get some structures to increase hero capacity, to get upkeep benefits, casualty replenishment, etc. But they cannot recruit units. You can only recruit units either through Nakai directly and transferring those units to the other armies, or you can use global recruitment through those other armies if you are in camp stance. Now, what's nice about Nakai is he has absolutely no penalty to enable in-camp stance. 0 whatsoever. He doesn't need any kind of movement points. But the recruitment situation means that if you lose Nakai in a battle, it doesn't mean you lose his army. If he dies in a battle, you're not going to be able to recruit until you get him back on the field, back on the campaign map, which can be the death blow to your campaign. Though it is worth saying that you can always retreat within your allied territory, within your vassal territory, with, like, say, a second horde, eventually replace that with Nakai if you lose it, get your units back up to speed. And your vassal will have substantial garrisons in every single one of his settlements. Like, look at this. It's got a bunch of saurs, a bunch of skinks, as well as some dinosaurs. The AI is not going to easily attack a settlement like this until much, much later in the campaign. So early on, these kind of settlements can be pretty safe from AI attacks. The AI is generally reluctant, and honestly, I think they will lose because any settlement gets a significant bonus if it gets attacked in terms of auto-resolve balance, just because it's a settlement. They're not so heavily defended when we're thinking about they're not so heavily defended when we're thinking about them, but they can be somewhat nasty to take. And one of the bigger issues, actually, when you're fighting a campaign in Cafe, is actually eliminating Nakai, because he'll just run around with his horde army, and he's got all these heavily fortified settlements that you want to take, and then he shows up with a full stack. It is an unpleasant business for any legendary lord in the Caphaean area, and generally what happens is you end up in a war, regardless of who you're playing. It can be Snitch, Lokir, Xiaoming. You likely will end up in a war with Nakai at one point or another throughout the course of your campaign. So this guy is an absolute bastard to deal with. Diplomatically, you do, diplomatically speaking, you can have good relations with other Lizardmen factions. You can also confederate other Lizardmen factions. Though when you do confederate them, you only keep their armies, which get converted into horde armies, minor horde armies. The only true horde army is under Nakai's control, and their settlements get transferred over to the defenders of the Great Plan, replete with these powerful garrisons. So yeah, there's quite a lot of cons when we're thinking about Nakai's campaign situation. Now, let's talk about the temples he can select when he's taking over a settlement. So you can either raise a settlement, or you can dedicate a settlement to a particular temple. So you have Quetzal, Itzel, and Sri Lanka. Now, Quetzal is probably the best one to focus on early on in a campaign. Like, the way it works, you have these different effects that you can use. They require Old One's favor that you gain through fighting battles. And they are on a cooldown. So for instance, it's a free turn cooldown, 5-turn cooldown over here. So you want to be strategic when you're using the Old One's favor. Old One's favor can also be used on research, some very, very powerful research. In fact, it might be better to save it up for some of that powerful research. But when it comes to the temples, I would argue Quetzal is probably your best early game choice. The reason is you have the inner ring. Like, this represents the permanent effects you will get faction-wide by dedicating to a particular temple. Now, you do want to dedicate to all of them, if only for the fact that you want to unlock some of these effects regardless. But the one you want to focus on, at least early on, is Quetzal. The reason is that 10% missile resistance, that's the first thing you're going to get. So the way it works in this circle, you will start with the effect here, and then you're going to make your way to the effect at the top. That's the final form. And this gives you 10% missile resistance. The missile resistance is the first thing you're going to get. The melee defense, then ward save, casualty replenishment, and finally diplomatic relations with Lizardmen. For Itzel, you get charge bonus, melee attack, an army ability to summon a hunting pack, I guess another, then weapon strength for beast, cold ones, cavalry, and Nakai, and then finally recruit rank for all armies and diplomatic relations. For Sri Lanka, you get you do get Winds of Magic benefit, Winds of Magic power reserve capacity, an army ability, a vortex spell, into Winds of Magic cost for certain types of magic, or basically all the magic you can use anyway as a Lizardman, and then of course diplomatic relations and magic item drop chance. So there is a good amount of power that Nakai can get, and hell, if you could get all of these, you would have probably one of the more powerful armies on the campaign map. Though, of course, you would have the issues of upkeep, you would have the issues of limitations. It's a slow-going campaign. Consider it something akin to the Tomb Kings, though you are going to have to pay upkeep for your armies, and upkeep, your economy, your income is not going to be the greatest in the world. You're not going to get a lot of money from post-battle options when it comes to settlements. Even when it comes to regular field battles, you're not going to be in that great of a position. So there are certainly going to be limitations, significant limitations when it comes to that. Though, when it comes down to the faction, I would say one particular benefit they do have, that the faction does have, is it does have a way to increase hero capacity by quite a bit through these temple favors. So you can get hero capacity for Saurus Scar veterans, for skink chiefs, and for skink priests. So you can get quite a few heroes. You can increase hero capacity with every army. There are structures, so you do need a tier 3 horde army to be able to do that. But you can increase hero capacity by quite a substantial amount. And then, of course, there's army capacity. You only start with the ability of having one army. You couldn't afford more than one army early on in the campaign anyway. But you can increase this army capacity. You can increase your global recruitment capacity. You can get diplomatic relations, more global capacity. So it's either diplomatic relations or global recruitment capacity at the top. Then you get recruitment benefits, post-battle benefits, horde construction costs, campaign movement range. This is probably the one you would really want to get into, but it is going to take quite a bit of Old One's favor, and you do need to get all of these free over here. You might be better off going with the sequence of growth to get that horde growth and eventually get sequence of healing. But increasing that tribute from vassals can really help you out during the course of your campaign. You just want to get your economy going as quickly as possible, though the bottom tree is going to require a substantial amount of Old One's favor. But you would be able to get a really ridiculous amount of tribute from vassals and upkeep benefit as well, though this is more of a late game benefit when we're thinking about it. But you might benefit from just getting the first one, which only takes 5 turns and gives you 20% tribute from vassals, as well as improving your horde growth. And then worry about increasing your army capacity. There are other ways to increase your army capacity than just research. You do have this particular structure, this particular chain, which will give you free army capacity. Research will give you 7, I believe it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7. So you'd be able to run with 8 armies. Just from research alone, with the structure in Nakai's army, you would be able to get 3 more. So 11 armies, that's more enough for any campaign, really. And then yeah, the various effects that you can get here. Generally speaking, blessed units, like blessed Carnosaurs, Stegodons, Saurus Warriors, you can get a lot of blessed units here, provided you do get Old One's favor. You won't get a substantial amount of it through the battles, but it will be acquired in every single battle. This is your faction-specific resource when you're playing as Nakai. So that's the faction. Let's talk about campaign plan. And campaign plans are always going to be dictated by your victory conditions. So they've changed these around. It used to be, I believe, when Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires came out, it used to be that you would have to deal with... you would have to go back to Lustria. You do have a sea lane over here, but going to Lustria would not have been the greatest situation. But now you have to deal with the Blessed Dread, the Dead Flag Fleet, and the Jiangxi Rebels. So you have to deal with Lokir, Vampire Coast, and Vampire Counts. Long campaign victory conditions beyond taking 70 settlements, looting, razing, or sacking them, though in your case, occupying them. It's also going to require you to deal with Village, the Caravan of Blue Roses, Nurgle, and Clan Pestilent. Oh yeah, Clan Pestilent. Though I wouldn't be too worried about dealing with Skrulk, because Skrulk tends to die on his own. Like the cult, between the cult of Sotek and Itza, Skrulk doesn't really have long for this world. He does tend to put up a pretty good fight, but he will not survive the tide of Lizardmen that's coming in the south. He might be able to if things really go his way, provided Albrecht decides to go to war against Itza fairly quickly in the campaign, and that distracts Gorok from being able to deal with Skrulk. But if Skrulk is having to face both the cult of Sotek and Itza at the same time, he simply will not survive that, which is obviously a huge benefit. So what's your campaign plan, keeping in mind the victory conditions? Well, you do start a war with the Norscan faction, a minor Norscan faction here in the Serpent Estuary. you want to take them out, and then I would say you should go for Mount Lee, take all of Mount Lee, raise it to the ground. You don't have to fight Cafe, but wiping out this Cafe faction will not create any issues in the long term in your campaign. I would avoid fighting the Burning Wind Nomads, just because if you do end up in a war with the Burning Wind Nomads, you're gonna likely end up in a war with Xiao Ming, which in turn will only benefit Snitch, and Snitch is going to be an absolute nightmare to deal with for the course of the campaign. You do want Xiao Ming and Miao Ying to help you out when it comes to dealing with Snitch. But your early campaign goal should be to take Mount Lee. After you've taken Mount Lee, you do have two choices. You can either go for the Nangchang Basin, or you can go for the Jade River Delta. From my perspective, taking the Nangchang Basin is probably your better choice, because that will result in Lokir and the fleet over here fighting it out, weakening each other further. So by the time you take out the rebels here in the Nangchang Basin, you can just swoop in, take the entirety of the east for yourself. Maybe get some alliances with Cafe along the way. Once that's sorted out, most likely Snitch. Though if you do desire to go for it, you could take the Imperial Road province, assuming they don't have a defensive alliance by that point with Miao Ying. If they do, you might want to avoid it, or you could just decide to screw it and go to war against all of Cafe. Keep in mind, if you do go to war in Miao Ying, you're gonna end up in a war with Xiao Ming and the rest of the Cafean factions. You are capable of winning this war. Cafe is not necessarily well suited to being able to stop you, though they do have some heavily armored units themselves. You do have pretty decent armored units, though the armor on Saras may leave something to be desired throughout the course of the campaign. It's decent, but it's just not the best armor in the entire game. 60 armor, pretty okay, pretty decent. But Cafe does have even more heavily armored units, and they do have a lot of armor piercing as well with their crossbowmen, provided they can get them. The Cafean faction here in Mount Lee, they're just going to get peasants. They're not really going to pose a significant challenge for you early on if you do rush them. If you take the Norskins and directly march for Shiwu, you will be able to wipe them out very, very quickly. But a long-term fight with Xiao Ming and Miao Ying, that's a different discussion. If you do decide to go for it, then I would just take out the, then I might even ignore taking out the Norskins and instead head directly to take out the Burning Wind Nomads, so that you can take Xiao Ming before he becomes too big of a problem. Or take out the Norskins, take out Mount Lee, take out the Nangchang Basin, and then go for the Burning Winds Nomads. But that will just give Xiao Ming time to grow more powerful. After that, what do you want to do? Well, you do want to wipe out Gorst for the long campaign victory condition. That 10 hero recruit rank is pretty substantial. So you're likely going to end up having to head west. Now, Nurgle is not really a problem as far as I see it. Generally because Nurgle tends to accomplish very little. Kugaf is not that great. But Gorst is going to be a bit of an issue. The reason he's going to be a bit of an issue, or a major issue, is that in theory, your units should be able to walk all over him. In practice, he's got so much healing in battle, and your units are not necessarily the best damage dealers, or at least your Saurus are not necessarily the best damage dealers. Like, if you can get Bastillodons by the point you're dealing with Gorst, then you should be able to, because it should be something you do after you deal with all of Cafe. Then you might be able to just trample him into the dust. And what you do after that is your decision, really. Once you've completed your short and long campaign victory conditions, you can take the entirety of the Mountains of Morn. You can evade the Chaos Wastes if you so desire. Or you could go to Illustria via the sea trade lanes. Though, you should certainly wipe out Village before you... like, your campaign plan, like what I personally do, would be take the Norskins, Mao Li, Nangchang, into Jade River Delta, into the plains of Zen, and then go for Snitch. After Snitch is dealt with, go deal with Village. And once Village is dealt with, yeah, go to war against all of Cafe, take out all of Cafe, and then go against Gorst and Kugaf if he's still alive, secure that campaign victory condition, and then capture the entirety of the Mountains of Morn. Alternatively, you could also just say, screw it, go to Lustria, play a campaign in Lustria, get good diplomatic relations with the Lizardmen in Lustria, eventually being able to confederate them if you get good enough relations and seizing a significant amount of territory for yourself. The Wood Elves over here in the jungles shouldn't be a major threat throughout the course of your campaign. In fact, if you do go to war against the Burning Wind nomads, you might even improve your relations. It's a shame you can't take territory and trade it, because that would really, really help your diplomatic relations with other factions. But anyway, that's all there is to say. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and I'll see you boys and girls next time.